Buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
The Michael Dukes Show.
I have 2 guns, one for each of you.
Firearms Friday.
As Thomas Jefferson stated, it is the right and duty of the people to be at all times armed.
Say hello to my little friend.
I say that the Second Amendment is, in order of importance, the First Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms is the one right that allows rights to exist at all.
The Michael Dukes Show. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Firearms.
From my cold, dead hands.
Friday.
This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun.
Firearms Friday.
Firearms Friday. Good morning, my friends. Welcome to the best day of the week for a multitude of reasons, mostly because we get to talk about my favorite topic today. That's right. Today is the day we dive into the Second Amendment and discussions of gun rights and of a gun nature and everything else. It is Firearms Friday here on the program. We're broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on this your favorite radio station and or FM translator. And, of course, live around the world on the internet on our website at michaeldukeshow.com, where the live stream is, as well as the podcast links and links to our different broadcasts on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and so much more. How are you folks doing? Are you ready for this Friday? First, I guess I should mention to those of you, I saved this I saved this for you here this morning. For those of you who live in the South Central area from Houston, Talkeetna, all the way down through the Mat-Su into Anchorage, freezing rain and snow possible for today. If you're driving in or getting ready to drive in, you might want to take a little extra time because there's been very, very little precipitation the last few weeks. But rain started falling last night and continued, and it's going to continue until about 7 a.m. this morning, according to the Weather Service. And it will likely freeze, creating a glazed donut effect over all the roadways. Conditions are expected to be slickest on the Glen Highway near the Palmer Hay Flats, Meadow Lake to Point McKenzie, East Anchorage, and more. It should warm up this afternoon, and that should go away. But if there's still wet on the road here tonight, that could be with more ice and snow accumulating. So be cautious out there. Be cautious and pay close attention to what's going on. On the program today, we're going to go over, a bunch of different stories, but we're going to start off the show with a bang with one of our favorite writers over at Reason Magazine, Jacob Sullum, who is a senior editor at Reason Magazine. He has been writing prolifically. There's another word that can go. He's been writing a lot on the topic of the Second Amendment and guns. And in fact, the story that I want to talk to you about is, it's already almost a week old. And he's written a couple more, and some other details have come out, including the fact that it turns out that the Lewiston shooter had actually been involuntarily committed this summer. And that information didn't get passed down to the FBI and the NICS background check. And there's so many problems here. So we may or may not discuss that. Today's topic with Jacob Sullum is going to be on the California assault weapons ban that was struck down by Saint Benitez. That's Judge Benitez there in California. And how it may face an en banc panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But the headline from Jacob's article reads, "It's hard to see how the Ninth Circuit can manage to uphold California's weapons ban." And we're going to talk about that Well, right now, because he joins us this morning. I wanted to give ourselves a little bit of time today because there is so much to discuss. Jacob Sullum from Reason Magazine with us this morning to discuss. Oh, did it again. Jacob, I'm going to ask you to reconnect because I could see your picture in the green room here, but oh, there it is. Never mind. Don't do a thing. Don't do it.
All
Man,
right.
I love that shirt. Man, it feels so tropical and nice. Jacob Sullum, Reason Magazine, our guest here on the program this morning, on to discuss it. How are you, my friend? How's life in the big city, wherever you are?
I'm in Dallas. Things are pretty good. Warmer than where you are.
Yeah, no, we a little bit of a winter weather advisory this morning for rain and ice and all that kind of stuff. But I will say that we've dodged a bullet on snow where I live. Usually it's snowed by now and stuck. But we haven't had any snow that's stuck so far. So I feel like I've kind of dodged the big winter bullet. It's coming, but we're dealing with it. All right. So Jacob, let's get started on this article. This was a great piece of news for people who are pro-gun in California when this decision came down. But of course, we know that the U.S. Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit, or Ninth Circus, as we like to call it here, is not necessarily a friend to the Second Amendment. So there's a lot of discussion. Give me some of the details of what happened here and where it goes from here before we get into the article.
Okay, so what happened most recently is that last weekend the Ninth Circuit stayed the decision that Benitez issued last month, finding that the California assault weapon ban was unconstitutional. They're going to hear that case. Previously, you might recall, Benitez a few years ago had already said this law was unconstitutional. That went up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit vacated that decision and said, reconsider this in light of what the Supreme Court said last June in Bruin, because we now have a different test we're supposed to be applying, a test based on historical evidence, trying to find relevant analogs that are similar to the law you're defending. So he did it over again, unsurprisingly reached the same conclusion it was unconstitutional, but he went into a detailed analysis of the evidence presented by the state, where they're trying to come up with examples from preferably around the time the Second Amendment was ratified or around the time the 14th Amendment was ratified and made the Second Amendment applicable to the states, evidence of laws that are analogous to what California has done, which is to ban this broad category, mostly of rifles, but also some handguns that meet certain arbitrary criteria. And the state, as they have done before, they did this in the case involving California's ban on so-called large capacity magazines. The judge says, give me the best evidence you've got. And they give him a list of over 300 laws going from the 14th century into the 20th century. And it's just kind of a hodgepodge of not necessarily relevant statutes, but like basically these are all the gun control laws we could find.
We call that the shotgun effect.
Yes, I think in this context, especially it's appropriate to call the shotgun approach. And so he winnows through these, and he did ask the state, "What's your best evidence? Which of these do you think is the closest example?" And perhaps somewhat surprisingly, they said that laws regulating the use of trap guns were the closest historical analogs. And what's weird about that is that trap guns, as Benitez points out, it's not a particular kind of gun. It's a way of using a gun. It's a way of setting a gun up to go off automatically. And so sometimes this was used actually to hunt game. Sometimes it was used against intruders, right? So you might set up a gun at the edge of your property or maybe even at the perimeter of your house. And it's supposed to shoot, people who aren't supposed to be there, shoot trespassers.
Right.
So several states said that was not cool. And
exactly.
You shouldn't do that. And so that's what California says is the thing that's most similar to the state's assault weapon ban. And it really is not very similar at all, especially in as much as it does not, first of all, it does not ban possession of any particular kind of gun. And that's,
Right.
you would want something like that. Obviously, we're not going to say, oh, there were no AR-15 bans in the 19th century because there were no
Right.
AR-15s. So that's not fair, but it's reasonable to say, give me something that's analogous. And then they cited a few other laws, as they did in the magazine case, that don't seem relevant. They cite regulations about how you can store gunpowder, which has nothing to do with crime prevention. This was a fire prevention measure.
Right.
And it does not seem analogous to saying, here's a category of guns you can't own. They cited rules about bladed weapons, which is getting closer because at least it's a kind of weapon, but we're supposed to be looking for a tradition of, according to the Supreme Court, tradition of firearm regulation. Obviously, these are not firearms. To my mind, actually, the closest they came, even though they didn't emphasize it much, was a ban on carrying cane guns, which I think Alabama had one. There might have been one or two other states. And, here the idea was that this is sneaky.
Right. It's sneaky.
It's the same idea that gave rise to these bans on concealed carry that a bunch of states enacted. You could still openly carry, but concealed carry was considered, ungentlemanly, dishonorable, sneaky. That was sort of the idea. Same thing with cane guns. I think this is, it doesn't look like a gun, but it is. So the first thing about that is that these were not commonly used cane guns. These were not, in wide use for lawful purposes. But secondly, it wasn't actually a ban on possession. It was a ban on carrying them. And to my mind, I think that's the closest, most analogous thing. They didn't actually play that up much. They talked about a bunch of other things that don't seem really at all similar to California's law.
They tried to hang their hat on laws that had racial bases for carrying and some other things, as if they were holding them up and saying, see, we did these laws before. And it was just not. And I'm just like, what? You couldn't be black and carrying a gun. You couldn't be Catholic. And I mean, they were throwing all these other, and I'm like, that's the law you're holding up and saying, this is the example of why we want to follow it. Are you insane?
Yeah, it's not a good look for the government when they resort to that. And they've done this repeatedly. They did this in the cases involving bans on gun possession by illegal drug users, where at least that was kind of like more seemingly relevant, because what they're saying is illegal drug users are dangerous. Here's some other groups that have been considered dangerous in the past. This is a precedent. Of course, what that really shows is that you don't want to trust the government to decide who's dangerous and decide who's allowed to own gun. I think that's what that historical evidence shows. But they brought it up because they brought up everything. In the assault weapon ban case, they also brought up, and by the way, look, the government used to say not just slaves, but free black people could not own guns, or they could only have guns with government permission, which was hard to get. Native Americans, Catholics at certain points. I don't know if they brought up Tories or not this time around, but the basic idea being, here's like every regulation we can find historically, even if a bunch of these things would be clearly unconstitutional today, we still think that it tends to support the idea that you can ban these particular weapons.
Well,
and Benitez is like, that doesn't really make any sense, because the whole reason that those laws existed is that black people were not considered to be full citizens. Slaves certainly were not considered to be citizens at all. Black people were not considered to have the same rights as white people. That's precisely why they were subject to these specifically targeted laws. This wasn't about this at this point. It wasn't even about discriminatory enforcement. It's about laws that say on their face, black people can't have guns. And unless, sometimes it's unless they get a license from the justice of the peace. Unless they get permission. So what that has to do, it really does not seem to have anything to do with the law that California is defending. So this was the problem for California, and now the problem for the Ninth Circuit, where, let's be frank, most judges of the Ninth Circuit really want to uphold this law. I think that's accurate. But how will they do it? So they have to do it, I think. They're not going to say these are not in common use for lawful purposes. How can you say that about guns that are, there are, according to the state's witness, there are, over 24 million in circulation. According to a recent survey, about 30% of gun owners have owned rifles that would be covered by California's ban. So they clearly are in common use for lawful purposes. They're almost never used to commit murder,
Right.
even though that's the state's whole emphasis.
Yeah.
They're that even just the whole category of rifles, which includes things that are not covered by California's law. I think Benitez said it was accounted for 464.
464, yeah.
Homicides,
all long guns, not just
so shotguns too,
squirrel guns,
right.
Hunting rifles, lever actions, all long guns. 464 deaths.
So even if we pretend, and that's nationwide, so even if we pretend all of those guns would have been covered by California's ban, what that means is that nearly all of the rest, meaning nearly all of them, are used for some kind of lawful purposes. And what are those purposes? Well, when you ask gun owners, here's what they say. They say, home defense is a popular response, recreational shooting, hunting.
Right.
Some people say defense outside the home. Right. So these, we know they're using them not for crime, but for these lawful purposes. So it seems very hard to deny that. I'm not sure the Ninth Circuit is going to try to deny that. So then the next step is, what's the relevant historical evidence? And I guess they could say, cane guns. That's good enough. But then you'd still have to let people at least own them.
Right. But that's the thing. Yeah, exactly.
So it'll be interesting to see what they resort to, I guess.
I want to continue with this because Benitez was exhaustive on this 79-page decision, which if you haven't read it, I posted it up last week. It's amazing. We're going to continue to talk about this with Jacob Sullum from Reason Magazine. It is the Michael Duke Show. It's Firearms Friday. Back with more right after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we are in the commercial break right now. Jacob Sullum is our guest, Reason Magazine. I don't want to repeat too much on the radio, but I got to say that when I first went through this, I saw the analysis and then I went and read the decision for myself. I think that there was a reason that Benitez was so exhaustive about this, and I think that that's going to play into what we're going to talk about here in a minute before we get there. But let's move on just for a moment. We'll change gears for the podcast listeners on this Lewiston thing. Have you seen the latest reporting on this thing for the Lewiston deal where this guy, the chain of failures, we've talked about in the past, the chain of failures in mass shootings. We talk about the Parkland shooter had over 20 interactions with local law enforcement and over a dozen interactions with the FBI before he went crazy and shot up Parkland. The Sutherland Springs shooter had a dishonorable discharge. None of that stuff was ever put forward onto his record, and so he was able to buy a gun lawfully, even though the Air Force didn't do it. They ended up paying $230 million in wrongful death suit out to the victims of that one because they fell down and entered the job. We can just go after case after case. The Naval Yard shooter had been chastised and charged at one point with discharging a weapon on the base before he went crazy on the Naval Yard shooting and everything. We see this time after time after time where it's a failure of the enforcement of the existing laws. And now we find out that this guy was involuntarily committed. He'd had contact with the police. They knew what was going on. Some of his fellow guardsmen were local sheriffs in his community and had seen his behavior firsthand. I mean, at what point do you just go, this is a failure of the system, not of the law we have in place, but a failure of the system?
Yeah, I mean, one of the criticisms that we heard after these shootings was that Maine's laws were too weak, and that's why this happened. And in particular, that its so-called yellow flag law was weak compared to the more traditional nowadays red flag law. Where, these are laws where you can get a court order that says this guy can't have guns for a certain period of time, and different laws have different standards. Maine's law is relatively demanding compared to some of these other laws in terms of what it takes to get a court order, but it absolutely could have been invoked in this case.
Absolutely.
What happens is the police start with probable cause to believe somebody is mentally ill, and I'm using scare quotes around that because I don't want to get into exactly what that means, but mentally ill, and because of this condition, may pose a threat to himself or others. They take him into protective custody. So he's already in custody at that point. And then they get an assessment from a medical practitioner. Does this guy seem dangerous? I think it's a likelihood of danger. And if the medical practitioner says yes, then the police are required to go to a judge, get an order, and this is an order without a hearing. So the initial order is without a hearing, lasts for up to 2 weeks. And then after that, there's a hearing, and then if the state can provide clear and convincing evidence of a danger, then they can get the order extended for up to a year, right? So that process could have been followed in this case,
right?
As you noted, there was lots of evidence that this guy was behaving in a weird way, seemed paranoid, was talking about violence, was acting violently in some cases.
Right.
And in fact, he was picked up by the police in New York State when he was training in New York State. And because he was behaving so erratically, they took him initially to the hospital West Point, and then they took him to another psychiatric hospital, and he spent 2 weeks there. They did an evaluation.
Right, and they treated him. I mean, that was the thing. That was the involuntary commitment. That's
but it's a bit. The fact that he was released after the 2 weeks suggests that at least at that point, I'm not sure what they did with him while he was there, but at least at that point, he was not deemed to meet the state's criteria for involuntary commitment for longer than those 2 weeks. But that doesn't have to be the end of the matter, because under Maine's law, it's not required that you meet the criteria for involuntary commitment, even under Maine law.
Hold on a second. Hold on. We're rejoining the radio here in 5 seconds. We're going to circle back around to this segment. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Here we go.
What the hell's an assault weapon?
If we could just figure out how to get all of the murder guns and the attack guns and not keep selling those to people and just sell protection guns, I think that would be great and solve a lot of problems.
Does this mean that if we hurt your feelings, you'd consider the Michael Dukes Show assault radio? Okay, we can live with that. Here's Michael Dukes.
Yep, protection guns. It's all I got. None of those bad murder guns. It's all I look for the tag that says this is a protection gun. Joining us this morning, Jacob Sullum, Reason Magazine senior editor for Reason, talking about the decision by Judge Benitez in California to basically smash down the assault weapons ban, which is currently on is being stayed by the Ninth Circuit overall. I have to say this, Jacob. Benitez was so exhausted. I mean, first he asks for laws from a specific period of time, essentially, 1774 through 1800, when the 14th Amendment was in place. They give him a bunch of laws from over a 350-year period. He could have just dismissed all those because they weren't in that time frame, but instead he went through and he piecemealed and he destroyed their arguments. Law by law, instance by instance. He took their expert witness to task and just kind of tore him apart. It was an exhaustive. This thing, 79-page decision, was exhaustive on all this, and I think that there may have been a reason for that, because, like you said, the Ninth Circuit is going to have a very difficult time dancing around the Brune decision, in lawful use. I mean, all these other kind of phrases and issues. And I think he did a yeoman's job in trying to basically hem them in a bit on this. And again, making some really amazing statements. I mean, when you talked about the long guns and only 464 deaths from long guns, including assault rifles, but that includes all different kinds of long guns. He actually said, he pulled out the calculator and said, statistically, that means that the death rate, in America is 0.0000186% for, all long guns, not just assault rifles. Which means that 99.99, you just start going through it, and it's amazing. This really is a damning kind of implication on this law.
Yeah, I mean, and the crucial thing after Bruin is that the Ninth Circuit is not allowed to do what it used to do and what a bunch of other federal courts used to do, which is to say, they called it a two-step analysis. Essentially, it was just an interest balancing test. Because they would say, is this conduct covered by the Second Amendment? And then they often would say, just for the sake of argument, let's say it is. But now we get onto the meat of this, which is, yes, these people complain of this burden, but what does the state say? This is the state's interest, and we're going to balance them to decide which is more important. So in the case of assault weapon bans, how this is always done is the state wants to prevent mass shootings, or it wants to reduce the number of people killed during mass shootings. This is a very compelling interest, right? And on the other side, you've got these people who say they have legitimate uses for these guns, but there are lots of other guns they could own, and so who cares? And that was how the analysis would go. Now they're not allowed to do that anymore. They have to instead apply this historical test, and I think it's going to be tricky. I mean, they might go to the knives. They might say that's enough of a precedent. Benitez, by the way, pointed out that even though you didn't have exactly the same guns in the 19th century, around the time of the 14th Amendment, you did have repeating rifles, which had were fed through a tubular device, and they could fire repeatedly, accurately, quickly. That seems analogous to what California is talking about now. And yet, even though these were very widely used, there's not a single example of a law that either banned them or restricted them. So it's not so crazy, right? I mean, some people say this historical test is unreasonable because technology has evolved, but you can find things that are relevantly analogous, and the absence of the statutes, that's really the thing that is I think most persuasive, is that there were all kinds of situations where the government could have enacted laws that are analogous to what California did, but just didn't. And you don't see really anything like. I mean, there are a few laws already in the 20s and 30s regulating machine guns, but that's really too late to illuminate the original understanding of the Second Amendment.
Right.
And then after that, you see nothing like this literally until 1989, when California passed the original version of this law, and then other states copied them in the 90s. And up until then, you could have this rifle with these features that they don't like, the telescoping or folding stocks, or pistol grips, or threaded barrels, or flash suppressors, right? This is all perfectly legal throughout the country, right? So this is a very recent development, historically speaking, and it really does not seem to be relevantly similar to anything that happened before.
Now, as you point out, the Ninth Circuit, which has a history of being, anti-gun, essentially. I mean, the overall panel of judges on the Ninth Circuit is definitely not a Second Amendment friendly court by any strange stretch of the imagination. And they have a habit of basically holding on and delaying cases that they don't want to see go before the Supreme Court through court actions and not moving forward. Now, they could potentially, I suppose, do that. But as you said, Benitez has been so exhaustive. The Bruin decision has been so decisive that they're going to have a very hard time justifying and going back and saying, oh, no, California was right the whole time, after Benitez, again, just dismantles every argument that they have on there. It's going to be a very, very tough road to hoe for them.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the historical evidence, it will be. It's not to say that they're not going to try. But let's be honest about this. I mean, the reason that they're inclined to try to do that is they think this is good policy, right? And that's not, under Bruin, that is absolutely not the constitutional issue, whether it's good policy or not. But perhaps what Benitez says with respect to that in his decision might have, finally some impact on the Ninth Circuit, which is to say this, aside from the constitutional issue, this just doesn't make sense. The distinctions that California is drawing between guns, which are allowed and which are not allowed. And he gives a couple of examples of, here's a pistol, it's perfectly legal, except if it has a threaded barrel. What the hell does that have to do with preventing violent crime?
Exactly.
Or mass shootings in particular? And he gave the example, which is often cited, of the Ruger Mini 14 rifle, which in one configuration with the fixed stock and without any of these other features that they've prohibited, that's perfectly fine. But once you start adding those features, same gun, the basic operation of it is exactly the same.
Yeah. Same gun, same bullets, same velocity, same killing power, same everything.
Yeah, so
cosmetically different.
It's not. There's no functionally important distinction whether you have these features or not, and yet in one configuration it's illegal, and the other one it's fine, right? So that and then of course the stuff we mentioned already about how rarely these guns are actually used to commit murder. Even in mass shootings, the most commonly used weapon is a handgun. And even if you can make them all magically disappear, people who want to commit these crimes will have plenty of equally lethal alternatives, right? So now I say all this not because it's constitutionally relevant, because under Bruin it's not. But if maybe some of that sinks in with the Ninth Circuit, they won't be so determined, based on the assumption that this is good policy, to try to make the historical case. Right. I don't know. Maybe if you still believe that this is good policy after all of these years, I'm not sure that anything can dissuade you. But
because they keep making the rational argument that this will stop all these things, that this will stop this and this will stop that. But again, when the instances of the uses of these firearms, specific firearms, is so incredibly low, down to 0.4 zeros after the decimal kind of decision. And then Benitez even manages to mention the DGU, the defensive gun uses, which is another amazing situation, which again has not been really talked about in many court cases. The fact that there's somewhere between 900,000 and over 2 million defensive examples of defensive gun use, where guns have been used defensively, in most instances, never even firing a single shot. And said on this balancing act, you've got 0.000186% on the one side, and on the other side, you've got 2 million instances of being used to actually prevent crime. Again, a very exhaustive look at what's going on. And, the Ninth Circuit's going to do what the Ninth Circuit's going to do, but they are going to have to really jump through some hoops to make this fly from their perspective.
I think so. In terms of defensive gun uses, again, keep in mind, not relevant, except to the extent it's not constitutionally relevant, except to the extent that it illustrates that these guns are in common use for lawful purposes.
Right.
Well,
it flips their argument, because that's what they were arguing about, is that, these guns have no other reasonable purpose.
Right. And obviously that's not true, because, they're owned by, 30% of gun owners have owned them. Tens of millions are in circulation. These are obviously not primarily used to commit mass murder. I mean, that's just obvious on the face of it. But he does cite, and this really goes to the policy argument, I guess, specific examples of people who use guns that would be illegal in California to defend themselves against multiple criminal assailants, right? So this is a rejoinder to people who say these guns are not even appropriate for self-defense. Nobody needs them for self-defense. And now you can say, well, did they need a folding stock in that context? And maybe they did. Maybe it helped them store it for self-defense in the home, whatever. You can talk about the specific features, but the point is that you have these guns that people do use self-defense. Typically, they don't fire rounds, but in these cases they had to fire rounds. And you ask, is this, can this gun be used for self-defense? It absolutely can. And in these cases,
it absolutely was. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. So that's relevant constitutionally to the extent that it establishes, lawful uses, but it also, I think, more relevant to the policy argument and the question of, whose interests prevail. And the way he puts it is, obviously it's horrifying that people are killed by mass murderers. And we remember those people. We talk about those events over and over again. But these other cases where people use these same guns in self-defense, possibly saving several lives, we tend not to hear about that.
Jacob Sullum, Reason Magazine, our guest. We're going to continue with him here in just a moment. That is super loud. We're going to go over here. We're going to be back with him in just a moment. We're going to talk a little bit here on the other side about one of his latest articles, which talks about the yellow flag law in Maine, which is not a red flag law state. They have a law that's similar, but not quite as abusive to due process for the citizens. But even that law has kind of been ignored or not fulfilled 100% on this case, which we're going to get into here in just a moment with Jacob Sullum, senior editor, Reason Magazine. We'll be back with more right after this.
Our light, our guide, and our trusted friend. Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Jacob Sullum, our guest here on Reason Magazine, from Reason Magazine. Jacob, I mean, I read through probably 85% of this decision, and it was just, to me, it was eye-opening to see a guy finally tell the government, and in this case, the government of the state of California, that essentially, in a polite way, your guys' arguments all suck, essentially, is what he's saying. I mean, he just goes after point by point and says, we know you're trying to do the one thing, but you're really just, you're not helping, essentially, in the long run. When you read through this, I mean, was it just like kind of one pleasant surprise after another in your mind? Did you see this as being kind of I don't know if I would say landmark decision or opinion, but definitely an eye-opening one, if nothing else?
Well, it was not surprising to me because the evidence California presented here is essentially the same evidence they presented in defending the state's limits on magazine capacity. They basically have a list of laws of over 300 of them, and they just cough that up whenever a law is challenged.
Right.
And furthermore, these are similar to laws that the government cites in the cases involving restrictions on gun possession based on your status, that you're a illegal drug user, or you have a felony record, or subject to a protective order. That case is before the Supreme Court right now. Whether the fact that a protective order was issued against you is good enough evidence for you to lose your Second Amendment rights. They basically cite the same laws over and over again. I was just writing yesterday about a challenge to the Gun-Free School Zones Act. And in that case, the government was a bit more focused. They didn't talk about trap guns. They didn't talk about cane guns and right, or dirk knives. But they cited basically the tradition of schools being sensitive places. And they had, first of all, a bunch of university policies. A couple from the 17th century, which actually by private universities, then by state universities in the early 19th century. All right, so these are rules that say students can't have guns on campus. Then they cite a bunch of state laws that say, for the most part, no guns in schoolrooms. And that's pretty much it. So the problem here, of course, is that you're saying either students can't have guns on campus, or you're saying nobody should bring guns into a schoolroom. Nobody's saying you can't have guns within 1,000 feet or anything like that of
right.
school property, not even a school building, but within 1,000 feet of school property. And of course, these schools are throughout the country, so there are lots of places that fall into these zones. This
with
particular
houses around them. I mean, you're talking about within a quarter mile of the school, almost a quarter mile of the school, you can't have a gun. You got houses all over the place and private roads and everything else.
And there's an exception under the statute. If you're on, you might be relieved to hear, if you're in your own home or on your own property, it doesn't apply. This case involved a guy who was afraid of a neighbor he had a dispute with. He was like patrolling the front of his house with his rifle, and everybody conceded that was perfectly legal. Whether it was advisable or not was another question, but it was legal. But once he stepped from his property onto the public sidewalk in front of his house, because he lived across the street from an elementary school, that became a federal felony. That's what the government says, right? But in trying to justify this under Bruin, the prosecutors end up citing a bunch of statutes that do have to do. They're more relevant than the laws that California is citing in the assault weapon case. But still, there's this crucial distinction where you're saying, okay, it's well established that the schools themselves are sensitive places, but we see nothing here about building a zone around a school where people can't have guns.
Right.
The one law that applied outside of the buildings was one that said you couldn't fire a gun in the immediate vicinity of a school building. Whereas, the federal statute says you may not possess a gun if it's unlocked, within not just in the immediate vicinity, but within 1,000 feet of school grounds, right? So these, obviously, you can quibble over what's close enough, but these seem relevantly different, and this is going to be the challenge in every one of these cases for the government to try to make this case. I think
how offensive. How offensive is it that the government keeps coming back and they keep throwing up, and in multiple cases, not just this California case, they've thrown up these laws that are like Jim Crow style laws where blacks can't have guns or Catholics couldn't have guns, the Irish couldn't have guns. Again, does it go all the way back to the Tories not having guns? I mean, it just seems like that's a pretty offensive idea that they're holding these laws up as a reason why we should have new laws today that are similar. It's mind blowing. All right.
Well, to me, it seems the opposite, that this is why we don't want to trust the government to make those decisions.
Exactly. This should be exactly the lesson learned there. The government should have nothing to do with something like that. Jacob Sullum, our guest, Reason Magazine, The Michael Duke Show. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
That's right. It's not your daddy's talk radio, although I did see my daddy in the chat room earlier. Hi, Dad. How you doing? Welcome back to the program. Jacob Sullum, Reason Magazine, our guest. We're talking about firearms today, of course, because it is Firearms Friday. One of his most recent articles, Don't Blame the Maine Shootings on Woefully Weak Gun Laws. The yellow flag law that's in, not a red flag, it actually is a yellow flag law, they call it, because I think predominantly it has some real protections and due process baked into it, which I think is good. But we're seeing, again, as we were talking about earlier, a failure of the system to kind of report a lot of the things that are going on. So I think there's more to blame here in a failure of government, law enforcement, and other things to enforce the laws that we have. But give us your quick thoughts here over the next 9 minutes on the Maine shooting and how blaming the yellow flag law because they didn't have a red flag law, how that would have changed anything in your mind or what's going on there.
Well, this looks like a situation where the yellow flag law could have been used but was not. Exactly why it wasn't, not clear, but there were lots of red flags, let alone yellow flags, in this case. Going back months before the shootings, this guy's family was worried about him. They said he was increasingly paranoid. His friends and his fellow service members reported erratic behavior, threats of violence, some actual scuffles. When he was training at, I think it's Camp Smith in New York State, he was behaving so weirdly that he was reported, and this resulted in state police coming and ultimately taking him to a psychiatric hospital where he stayed for 2 weeks. And he underwent an evaluation there, and he was released after the 2 weeks. So what that means is that at that point, at least, he did not meet the criteria for involuntary commitment. But that's not the end of the matter, because under Maine's yellow flag law, the guy does not have to be eligible for voluntary commitment. This law relies on an earlier provision having to do with probable cause to believe somebody's mentally ill and therefore poses a threat to himself or others, and that results in protective custody. That was a pre-existing provision. What this law says is in those circumstances, when you've taken somebody into protective custody, you can go to a medical practitioner and say, you think this guy poses a likelihood of foreseeable harm. And the doctor, probably a psychiatrist, evaluates him. And if he says, yes, I do think that, then the police are required to go and get a court order, which is issued without a hearing. And that lasts for up to 2 weeks. And the court order says you can't have guns. You can't buy guns. You can't own guns, not just guns, actually dangerous weapons in general. After 2 weeks, he gets a hearing. And then if the government can provide clear and convincing evidence that he poses a threat, the order can be extended for up to a year. Okay. That process could have been followed in this case. We know that local police were investigating. They got reports from the relatives. They got reports from his base in Maine. They got reports from at least one friend said he was threatening to shoot up the base. But possibly because the relatives indicated they thought they could handle this at some point, like, we'll take care of it, we'll get his guns. That was in one of the police reports. Maybe for that reason, they didn't actually use the law. So this is not an indictment of the law as being too weak. This is, if anything, an indictment of law enforcement failing to use the law. And by the way, you see the same thing in states with red flag laws. Red flag laws have fewer and weaker procedural protections, but it's the same basic idea. Here's a guy we think is dangerous. We're going to take away his guns and stop him from buying guns. And you see, in one state after another, you see it in New York, in California, in Colorado. These are all states with red flag laws, mass shootings, and in some cases, like in the massacre in Buffalo, you have what seemed to be, at least in retrospect, very clear red flags, right? And yet the law was not invoked. And so you can't say, oh, well, therefore we need stricter laws. You have to say, why wasn't it invoked? And if there weren't good reasons, well, I guess we need to change our practices so that we are more careful in the future. Or you might wonder, some cases is more ambiguous, is this really a practical thing to try to figure out who is actually a future mass murderer as opposed to just a troubled oddball, because there are lots of those.
Sure.
And lots of those get subject to these orders. Almost none of them actually would have, committed mass murder, but maybe a few of them, this is the theory, a few of them might have. And that's the whole operating theory.
Yeah.
And so you can say law enforcement should be aware of the laws and use them as appropriate. But it shouldn't be like using them willy-nilly because, we screwed up that last time. We didn't prevent that massacre. So from now on, if there's any suspicion about somebody, we're definitely going to seek an order, because that errs in the opposite direction. And now you have a problem where lots of innocent people who actually don't pose a threat lose their Second Amendment rights, right? So you have to weigh these two things against each other. And if you cast a wide net, as gun control advocates tend to think the government should do, the wider you cast the net, the more innocent people who are, totally harmless are going to lose the right to armed self-defense. And that's not a small thing to my mind, even if it is, for only a year, or in some cases 2 years, whatever. He gets his gun rights back eventually, typically. But that's a real problem. And I think the general debate about red flag laws overlooks the fact that there is a trade-off. That even if you think that it's practical to identify mass murderers ahead of time and thwart them, that in trying to do that, you have to think about who are the innocent people who will be harmed by this policy. And that's why you have these procedural protections to begin with. Every state that has a red flag law has some kind of protections, right? It's just a question of whether are they rigorous enough. Is the standard of proof rigorous enough? Are judges issuing these initial orders without a hearing at the drop of a hat? And yes, basically they are, right? That's a problem because basically judges will always issue these initial orders because they're worried about being blamed if something horrible happens, right? So they basically will always issue those orders. Given that fact, it's absolutely important that you have a prompt hearing.
Right. Then you have some due process. That's the biggest problem with many of these red flag laws is that they lack any kind of robust, in some cases, almost any due process, depending on the state, but in most cases, any kind of robust due process where you get a chance to have a say to defend your rights.
Yeah. I mean, what happens typically is that you've already lost your guns before you even get a hearing. Now you go into your hearing and you don't have, by the way, a right to a taxpayer financed attorney. So if you can't afford an attorney, you are really shit out of luck because this is a complicated process and you really need legal representation. But you go into the hearing, and at this point, the judge is saying, okay, this guy already has an order against him. Should I lift the order? That's what the judge again is going to worry what might happen if I do that. Whereas if I just leave it in place, right, the inertia is behind leaving the order in place,
right?
And the judge's fears about what might happen if he lifts the order will encourage him. Now you have to present more evidence at that point. The respondent has a chance to actually respond, but still, I think the incentive is to maintain the status quo because it's presumptively protective. And so, extend it for 6 months, extend it for a year. And in some states, the guy can come back and argue, well, now I'm not a danger anymore, or I never was a danger. You wrongly decided I was, but I definitely am not a danger. And then he has to prove he's not a danger, right? So it's a very daunting process, and it's basically rigged against the gun owner from the beginning.
Yeah, the right.
That's why we really need to be cautious about looking to that as a solution.
And I agree, especially since we see that the track record on these instances is not great. And we'll talk about that in the next hour. But we're pretty much done here with Jacob Sullum, Reason Magazine. Jacob, as always, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for coming on board. Keep writing, my friend. You're doing great work. I love it. Don't go hold the line for just a second before I don't want to let you go here during the break. So hold on a second. Folks, we're going to be back. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Jacob is writing some great stuff, and I'm gonna let me drop his bio link here in the chat room from Reason. You can go to this page and not only read his bio, but you could see everything that he has written on Reason recently, and he's got some fantastic stuff on the Second Amendment. This is totally out of left field, Jacob, but it's I've been thinking about it every time I interview. I keep meaning to ask. I see you're in a gaming chair. You got a gaming headset on. Are you a gamer too? Are you?
I am absolutely not. I was just curious. Years ago, I used to play Doom.
Oh man.
And it kept me up all night. And at a certain point, I was like, if I want to really get good at this, I have to just devote my life to it, and that's just too much.
Yeah.
So I haven't played video games much since that era, but the chair's comfortable and it's adjustable,
the chair is comfortable,
and it's got like a little footrest, and that's
they do make good chairs. Yeah, they do make good chairs. That's for sure. Absolutely. I was just curious because I'm a big old nerd myself, so I enjoy a little bit of that. And I always like to find out if it looks like they might be a gamer, I like to find out about it and get, because there's a libertarian gaming group. I didn't know if you knew that. There's a libertarian gaming group.
I have to say, it does not surprise me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jacob, keep up the good work, my friend, and thanks for taking the time out. I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you spending a little time with this little radio show. And as always, enjoy yourself. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again here sometime soon.
You too. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Jacob Sullum, Reason Magazine, here on the Michael Duke Show. All right. Well, we have got a full boat of stuff to talk about here in the next couple segments, and then we're going to finish up with Willie Waffle this morning. It is going to be good. If the invocation of these laws can fail, asks Brian. Oh, I'm going to have to restart the thing, aren't I? If the invocation of these laws can fail, how can we count on the other side for restoration? Asked Brian. I mean, I think that's a definitely a good question. How can we count on the other side to restore if they, and in fact, red flag laws, as I have said in the past, red flag laws are one of the only things where essentially you're guilty until you can prove your own innocence. There's no presumption of innocence on this. This is, you are guilty until you can prove your own innocence. And that is, well, problematic to say the least. Absolutely problematic to say the least. So definitely a big question. And we're going to get into that here in the next segment as we break down what happened in the instances with the main shooter for sure. All right, here's what I'm going to do. This is driving me bananas here. The lag, the absolute dragon lag. So we're going to rejoin the radio here in about 3.5 minutes. So I'm just going to take a quick 20-second break here and reboot this. I'll be right back. You guys don't go anywhere. You'll see the blue screen here in just a second. Here we go. And we're back. Yes. The coffee refill. It's the perfect opportunity to go grab some coffee. I mean, I think that took us all of what? I can tell you exactly how long. Took us 22 seconds. So that's not a bad thing. All right. So coming up in hour 2, we are going to talk about what happened in Lewiston and in Maine. We'll talk about a new poll that talks about what people really want with regarding guns. Do they want new laws or do they want better enforcement? We'll talk a little bit about Ohio, which recently passed permitless carry, and what does that mean for their statistics? Because all the people who were against it said it would become the Wild West. People will die, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some new developments out of New Mexico as well, which, that governor, she's been pretty quiet for a reason. She's been real quiet for a reason. So we're going to talk about that as well this morning here on the program. Oh, and we're going to open up the phone lines. We're going to open up the phone lines as well so that you can call in if you want and talk about any of these things. So let's, I guess we'll get that going on first. 907-433-3150, 907-433-3150. If you'd like to sound off, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Feel free to smile and dial and get ready to have a chit chat here this morning. That sounds like a Kit Kat. Everybody wants a Kit Kat bar. Been thinking about, Teresa says, I don't know what she's thinking about here. Thinking about Illinois' Condition 1 law prior to the 10/7 tragedy. I'm not familiar with Illinois' Condition 1 law. Teresa, if you want to tell me what I'm interested. Tell me what you're talking about there. I'm not familiar with Illinois' Condition 1 law. Jeannie says, actually, I'm going to read that when we return to the radio because I think it's a good place to start. It's a good place to start. And yes, each and every one of you should go back and read the decision by Judge Benitez because it is thorough and it is very, very interesting. Brian said the sad thing is very few people actually read decisions. They take the words of experts like Joy Behar, who is the only thing she's an expert in is being a gosh. In my opinion. I mean, it's about the only thing that I'm excited about. All right, here we go. We're jumping back into it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Let's do it.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
The Michael Duke Show.
I have 2 guns, one for each of you.
Firearms Friday.
As Thomas Jefferson stated, it is the right and duty of the people to be at all times armed.
Say hello to my little friend.
I say that the Second Amendment is, in order of importance, the First Amendment. The right to keep and bear arms is the one right that allows rights to exist at all.
The Michael Duke Show. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Firearms.
From my cold, dead hands.
Friday.
This is my rifle, this is my gun, this is for fighting, this is for fun.
Firearms Friday.
Oh, baby, yes. Firearms Friday. That one day a week we get a chance to talk about issues related to the Second Amendment and so much more. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the program. It is Friday. Special alert for those of you in the South Central area. We got a National Weather Service alert about freezing rain and snow possible for Anchorage, the Mat-Su, all the way up into Willow and Talkeetna. Definitely, if you're driving in this morning, you might want to take your time. I have not been on the roads today, obviously, and I can't give you personal reporting, but they're saying that started raining last night, and there could be up to 1/10 of an inch of ice on the road for portions of Anchorage and the Mat-Su Valley and the Susitna. 1 to 2/10 of an inch of ice accumulation between Houston and the Talkeetna cutoff. Also, they say the most dangerous or the most slickest conditions, I guess I should say, are going to be on the Glen Highway near the Palmer Hay Flats, Meadow Lake to Point McKenzie, and in East Anchorage. They're expecting it to continue till about, right around now, 8 a.m. this morning. And they said as the rain falls, it will likely freeze on the cold road, creating that icy glaze over the roadway. So pay attention if you're driving in this morning. Should be cleared up by mid-morning, midday, as the weather is expected to turn warmer. But hey, still no snow, so I'm feeling good about it. I'll deal with that. I'm feeling good about it. Hour 2 of the big radio show. We just finished up with Jacob Sullum from Reason Magazine for Firearms Friday. A great interview. If you missed that, you can go back and listen to it on the podcast or watch it on the replay. Here on the program now, we are opening up the phone lines for hour 2 because we like to do Q&A, gun Q&A, questions and answers. There's no such thing as a dumb gun question. If you want to talk about any of the subjects that we've covered here this morning, we'd love to hear what you have to say. Feel free to throw us a line and give us your thoughts again at 907-433-3150. Got some stories to go over and some other things, but I do want to talk a little bit here. We finished up with Jacob talking about red flag laws and how Maine doesn't have a red flag law, but it has a yellow flag law, which is similar, although it offers more protections for the individual, a more due process for the person whose guns are attempting to be taken away and removed. Jeannie in the chat room says the Maine yellow flag law was picture perfect. However, it relies on people doing their jobs. All laws are dependent on people enforcing them. Writing them means nothing unless you're going to use it. And unfortunately, what we've seen in the past is a track record by governmental organizations and bureaucracies that it shows that that they don't necessarily have they don't have a great track record on this. I mean, we're going to talk here about the Maine shooting in just a second and some of the things that we're discovering now. But the issue is this is prevalent. We've talked about it. The Sutherland Springs shooter in Texas. He was dishonorably discharged from the Air Force. He had some real problems, and that was supposed to be reported to the NICS system. That's one of the things that you get a dishonorable discharge, you don't get your firearms rights, right? I mean, it's a deal. That wasn't reported. And in fact, the Air Force was later on forced to pay $230 million to the victims and their families from that shooting back in 2017. We've got the Parkland shooter in Florida who shot up the Parkland High School. He had over 20 incidents or 20 interactions with local law enforcement. These were not friendly interactions, okay? He had over a dozen interactions with the federal law, FBI. And yet this guy was somehow able to go out there and pass through all the things and come up and do, and you go all the way back to the Virginia Tech shooter. The guy there that back in Virginia Tech back in the day, his therapist had failed to report him as a potential danger. The Naval Yard shooter who had interactions with the MPs before that and still hadn't had his security clearance revoked. He had been gun discharges and all different. I mean, there's story after story after story that there were plenty of, red flags, I guess, that these people were problematic. And it just shows that, what is the question here? Is the problem that we don't have enough gun laws? Or is the problem that we're not enforcing the laws that are already on the books? And I know that's a weak argument because I've made the argument before in this program that we really shouldn't have most of these laws. But I mean, at least I'm going to make the argument that if the law is there and it could have potentially stopped it, then by God, they should have at least enforced the law that they did have, whether the law was good or bad at this point. They don't use it as an argument to say we need more. A bombshell report by the Boston Globe offers some confirmation about the Maine shooter. Turns out that he was involuntarily committed to an Army hospital earlier this summer. After that commitment, the Army told the shooter's commander that he should not have a weapon, should not handle ammunition, or participate in live fire activity while on duty. However, that order does not appear to have had any effect on the shooter's ability to purchase it or use a gun as a civilian. In fact, the only reason the shooter was blocked from buying a suppressor, which there was another report, I don't know if you saw that, but that he had paid for and gone through the process of getting a suppressor. He'd filled out the forms and everything else. But when he went to actually transfer the device to him, he self-reported it on the form. There was basically a question on the form that said, have you ever been, I can't remember what the verbiage is, but basically, have you been adjudicated? Have you ever spent time in a mental facility kind of thing, mental health facility? And he self-reported that he had. He checked off the box. And the FFL said, I'm sorry, I can't transfer this to you, and held it back. He self-reported that. If he hadn't been truthful, there was nothing to stop him from picking up the suppressor at the gun store. Under federal statute, involuntary commitment should have made the shooter ineligible to purchase or possess guns as well, but that involuntary commitment wasn't reported to anybody, apparently. This is just one of the many shocking revelations that have come to light in the last 6 days, 7 days, 8 days since he opened fire on that bowling alley in Lewiston. Has sparked criticisms about what authorities could have done to prevent it. Among other disclosures that have come out, I mean, and this goes back to Uvalde. They just stood around with their thumbs in their butts for weeks at a time. And I mean, I could just go through instance after instance. The Parkland, the school cop at Parkland who basically went outside, locked the doors, and stood outside and hid, right? I mean, just issue upon issue. Among other shocking revelations is that a warning from a reservist in September said that the shooter was, quote, going to snap and commit a mass shooting. The local sheriff's department failure to make contact with Card. They failed to make contact with Card during 2 different wellness checks that they were supposed to do up with the shooter. They didn't do that. And that all departments agreed to let the shooter's family lock away weapons rather than having law enforcement officials intervene. That they just missed the boat on this whole thing. One thing after another. To make matters worse, the Globe reports that multiple law enforcement officials witnessed the deterioration of the shooter's mental condition firsthand because they served alongside him in the 3rd Battalion of the 304th Infantry Regiment of the National Guard. At least, this is from the Globe, at least 4 law enforcement agents, including the sheriff of the county that neighbors Lewiston, served alongside the shooter during this year of tumult, witnessing him growing increasingly paranoid and to contemplate violence, according to police reports. Christopher Wainwright, the sheriff who oversees Oxford County, and Matthew Noyes of Androscoggin County deputy were in the car with Card that July night when he spiraled with paranoia, accusing the men of calling him a pedophile. Over and over, he told the 2 police officers and fellow reservists that he would take care of it. The it was never clarified, but the shooter's mania persisted through the night. His commander, Jeremy Reamer, also a police officer with the Nashua Police Department, alerted other police officers. So, I mean, this was not like this was a surprise that this guy was off his rocker. And Tom Knighton over at Bearing Arms, Cam Edwards over at Bearing Arms repeats the same thing that I've been saying, that this failure to notify the Army to notify federal authorities of his involuntary commitment would basically parallels what happened with the Air Force failure to communicate in Sutherland Springs back in 2017. The Globe notes that even if the killer had been reported to NICS, that wouldn't have automatically prompted law enforcement to remove any currently owned firearms in his possession. But even after he'd been released from his involuntary commitment in New York, he displayed increasingly disturbing behavior in Maine. And apparently no steps were taken to commit him to a mental health facility closer to home or use the yellow flag law to temporarily bar him from possessing any firearms. There were multiple opportunities, multiple warning signs that this was going on. And it just seems like this has become a more common occurrence than we've ever, that we ever expected. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So the question becomes, do we want new gun laws or do we want better enforcement of the laws we have? There's a new poll out about that. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Phone lines are open, 907-433-3150, The Michael Duke Show.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Yeah, Fort Hood as well. I mean, that guy was acting more and more erratically. He actually had SOA printed on his business cards. And I mean, he was a military officer and nobody bothered to ask him what SOA meant on his business card. Soldier of Allah, right? That was, he had that print. I mean, nobody else noticed. He was becoming more and more radicalized. That's weird. It's just, yeah, the whole thing. It's a whole thing. Jeannie says, that's a whole pile of poussoir. That's right. Poussoir. All right. Poussoir, number 3. Terry says, number 3. I don't know what that means, but it's number 3. Are you guys making a list of the weird things that I say? Is that what you're doing? What did I say? So somebody said, what did I say the other day that people are like, what? And I'm like, I don't know. It just, kind of comes out sometimes. That stuff just kind of comes out sometimes. I know what I mean in my mind. My wife, sometimes she just shakes her head at me and goes, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Oh, man. Nothing like getting, what else did I say? What was it? Skookum, Chuck? Skookum? I said baked in a squat the other day, and somebody said, what? I said, baked in a squat. Analysis paralysis. That just kind of, they get, so they start to circle think something so much they can't get out of their own head, and they baked in a squat. All right. I got one phone line on hold, and the committee has been outed. Oh, hopium. Yeah, hopium isn't. That's what it was. I said hopium, and they were like, what? I mean, it's like unobtainium. Something made out of unobtainium. You're never going to get that. Hopium is kind of the opposite. Well, you hope you're going to get it. So it's hopium as opposed to unobtainium. I don't know, man. Sometimes I just make stuff up. What are you going to do? Just, makes perfect sense in my mind. That's probably why you don't want to look in there. All the voices in my head, I couldn't decide which one to talk to this morning. Throne reading, pontification. Yeah, throne reading. That's the reading room, by the way. I'm gonna go to the throne and the reading room, and I'm gonna hang out for just a bit. All right. Let me go over here. We got 2 minutes. I'm going to go over to the phone lines and see who's here and who's joining us. It might be Fred. Let's see what's going on. Good morning. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? It's Fred in Rhode Island. How you been?
Hey, Fred. Good morning, my friend. I'm going to put you on hold here, and we'll be back to you here in just a sec. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wondering, are you getting a strange clicking noise on your end?
I am not getting an extreme clicking noise on my end.
I got this real annoying. It's kind of like somebody dragging their fingers across a blackboard in the reception. I'm going to call you right back. Maybe it's just a connection. I'll call you right back.
All right, thanks, Fred. I appreciate it. You give us a shout here in a minute. We'll kick Fred to the curb there. We'll get started here in just a moment. We're about a minute out over there. Good morning. We'll talk to Fred here in just a moment. Throne reading and pontificating. Oh my God, that'll be all the weird things I say. I mean, it'll be a book or something eventually, right? Because I say so many strange and bizarre things. This is one of those things. I don't know what to do. Okay. All the laws in the world are irrelevant if no one is enforcing them honestly. Well, it's true. And that, again, is part of the problem with this whole idea of an Irish democracy. We have kind of the same problem. I mean, if that's how they develop, is in part because of all those things. I hate it, says Patrick, when all the voices in my head go quiet. I don't know what they're planning. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. Just because you're paranoid, my friend, doesn't mean that they aren't out to get you. All those voices in there, it's going to make me crazy. All right, let's get back to it. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, follow, subscribe, do the whole thing. Let's get to it. Here we go.
What the hell's an assault weapon? What isn't? If I assault you with a penguin, doesn't that make it an assault weapon? Does this mean that if we hurt your feelings, you'd consider the Michael Dukes Show assault radio? Okay, we can live with that. Here's Michael Dukes.
I mean, seriously. What are you thinking? It's a penguin. It's a penguin. Oh, of all the voices to listen to, that was the one I listened to when I wrote that. Okay, here we go. We're jumping back into it here. Hour 2 of the Michael Duke Show on this Firearms Friday continues. We got one line on hold. I believe that it is Fred in Rhode Island. Let's go over here and see if I'm right on this, and we'll get his thoughts on what's happening today. Good morning, my friend. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Yeah, that fixed the problem, all right. With marbles going down the set of steel stairs.
Okay, good,
That's what it
good,
sounded
good.
like.
What's on your mind, sir?
Well, here's my take on this whole thing up in Maine. Obviously he dropped the ball big time. I mean, they put all these wonderful laws in place that are supposed to prevent all these from happening. They never act on it. Nobody lifted a finger to jump on it, even if it was by mistake. Even if it was, well, we get it, and it turned out that we were mistaken and we didn't have to take the guns away. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially in a situation like that was screaming obvious that there was something wrong with this guy. I mean, that was just
right
negligence, absolute negligence that resulted in this happening. But yet, guess what? Guess what they're going to blame? They're going to blame the assault weapon, the weapon of war. That's the whole problem. We have these things out there in civilian hands, and they shouldn't be there. And yet, when you stop and think about it, it really wasn't a complete civilian. The guy was military, right? The guy was military.
Oh, right. That's actually a good point.
And they have far greater things than any AR-15 could do. So you sit there and say, well, it's once again, it's not the device. It's kind of like, it's an analogy I heard not too long ago, which makes perfect sense. You get a person who's the town habitual drunk, whatever town it may be, and he drives a particular type of a car, sports car or whatever, or a big heavy sedan. And the guy drinks and drives all the time, and he's had numerous run-ins with the law and, DWI and minor fender benders and whatnot because he drinks. So he goes out. Nobody does anything to try to get him off the road. Get his license, take his car away, suspend his driving privileges, put him under supervision, something like parole. And guess what? One day he goes out, smashes into a school bus, or he runs down a bunch of kids at a crosswalk, or into pedestrians, and kills a bunch of them. What do they blame? They blame the car. You got to take away these assault cars. We can't have these assault cars out there, because somebody who is irresponsible enough to be drinking and driving all the time is responsible for these actions, but it's the car's fault.
Right.
So you got to take away the cars.
Well, Fred, this is the same argument that I made. Remember, what was it? Must have been just under 10 years ago, because I remember it was just after I moved to Anchorage. There was the news story about the guy who rented a pickup truck in New York, and he ran down a bunch of kids during Halloween. Well, you don't see anybody going after the rental company. You don't see anybody going after Ford Motor Company. It was a Ford pickup truck that he used. Nobody said anything about that. The guy who ran down the marchers down in, I think it was Carolina or wherever, where he took the Dodge Charger and ran over a bunch of people. You don't see anybody going after Dodge Motor Company for that. I mean, you're exactly right. Somebody gets drunk, goes down, kills a bunch of people. They're not suing Jack Daniels. They're not suing Chevy. They're not suing whoever. But in these cases with the firearms, it's always the gun manufacturer's fault. And again, it's a lack of accurate thinking on these things, and it's more the emotional aspect than the logical aspect.
Yeah, it's the emotional aspect. Like I said before, there's a nefarious underlining to this whole thing. So you really should start paying a little more attention to, because one day somebody's going to drop a dime. Somebody's gonna become an informant who's on the inside of this right now, and one day they'll wake up and say, "This is just plain wrong," and they're gonna let the cat out of the bag, and then we're gonna get to the bottom of what's really going on here, because there is something really going on here as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I mean, again, I would say I don't know if it's some big overarching conspiracy. I think you've got a lot of people who believe kind of in the same philosophy, the narrative that I've talked about in the past, what I call the narrative, which is the fundamental belief that the only way society can move forward is with the direct benevolent intervention of government. And of course, a lot of people who are on the other side of the spectrum, who are more individual, rugged individualists or conservatives, libertarians, they think that the government's job is to stay out of most things. And so they will oppose that. Well, the people who believe in the narrative, they think that they're right. They know that in their heart that they're right. And what they've got to do is they want to use government as a bludgeon and a force to make other people align with their beliefs, to come into the thing that government is the solution to all the problems. And to do that, they have to eliminate all these pesky people who don't want that. They have to eliminate their ability to defend themselves. So while I don't think it's an overarching, some kind of sinister, twirling the mustache plan, I think you've got a lot of people that have the same belief systems, and they see that anybody who can defend themselves from government overreach is part of the problem, and they want to disarm them. I think that, I truly believe that that's what that in their hearts they believe that.
Yeah, you're right. I just had one other thing, the other day, which kind of threw a little bit of a different light on that situation up in Maine as well. There's another radio show that takes place over here on the weekends. The guy's really good. He runs a gun shop, and he has his own little program on the weekends. And what he had mentioned, I don't know where he got his information from, but if there's any truth to it, it falls in perfect alignment with what's going on. At either the bowling alley that he shot up, or this bar, or both, were gun-free zones. Were posted as no weapons allowed in here. Not if there's any truth to that, but if there is anything to it, then that definitely puts a whole different shade of light on the situation.
Well, yeah,
scoping things out ahead of time.
As Dr. Lott has pointed out, and we just had him on the program here a little bit ago, 95% of these shootings take place in gun-free zones, and in many cases, in many readings of manifestos and publicly available their blogs or their journals or whatever, many of them say that they go and they scope out these places and they avoid the places that has either not a gun-free zone or armed security. The guy who shot up the Dollar General, he'd actually gone to another Dollar General beforehand, but there was an armed security guard there, so he moved on to another one. It happens all the time where people are unable to defend themselves from this situation. I mean, the bartender at the bar, that's a tragic story. He attempted to take on the shooter. He took out the butcher knife from behind the bar, I'm assuming the ones that they used to cut the lemons and the limes with, and he went after the shooter to try and stop him and was killed. If he had had a gun behind the bar, been able to defend himself, maybe it would have turned out differently. Maybe not. But at least he would have had a fighting chance instead of a throwaway chance at that point.
Absolutely right. Absolutely correct. It makes sense too, because Maine, kind of like Alaska, it's a gun-friendly zone. I mean, everybody carries if there's constitutional carry. And I'm surprised that no one was armed. So the only thing that makes sense is they had to be gun-free zone.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Not one person in either one of those establishments was armed.
Right. Which makes me, again, goes back to one of my previous comments that I made years ago, that pretty much if you're around me, you're not in a gun-free zone. I don't care what the sign says. I don't care what the deal is. If you're around me, because I know that those places have a much higher incidence and statistically a much higher probability of something happening at those locations. So just be assured that if you're around me, you are not in a gun-free zone. That's pretty much what my belief is. I would much rather pay the fine or be trespassed from a location if they discovered that I was armed, rather than being unarmed and having to deal with a situation like that and being able only to use my body, because I'm old and fat. You know what I mean? I don't want to necessarily have to deal with that without having an equalizer in that regard.
You're not alone.
Yeah. So, all right, Fred. Well, hey, thank you for your call. I appreciate you calling in today.
You take care, Mike. Have a good week.
All right. Fred from Rhode Island, our weekly caller. I don't know how he even, we should ask him one day, how did you discover the show? Because he's over in Rhode Island. I mean, how does he even, it's crazy. So we were talking about, what do you want? Do you want new gun laws, or do you want better enforcement of the current laws? Of course, one of the arguments from the pro-gun side has been, hey, we've got laws on the books. Why aren't we using them? When every instance of these things happening creates a whole slew of people calling for more laws, which I don't know what new laws. The only new law that would have stopped this, I guess, in that regard, would have been a full ban on AR-style rifles. Although, I mean, how long ago did this? I don't even know. I don't even know. He obviously was able to buy guns. He was obviously able to get ammunition. He was obviously able to do all these other things. So a new Rasmussen survey conducted in the aftermath of this shooting in Maine substantiates what the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms has been saying for years. Americans think law enforcement of existing gun laws would do more to prevent gun-related violence than passing new laws. This is something that people have argued on the gun side for years. And the CCRKB is definitely one of those organizations. Alan Gottlieb, who is the CCRKBA, is part of the Second Amendment Foundation. Alan Gottlieb said Rasmussen did this survey after the Maine tragedy, so it was definitely on everyone's mind. And it turns out that 57% of voters say stricter enforcement of existing laws would be more effective, while only 30% believe passing new laws would do more. We're winning in that regard. All right, we got to go. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Okay. Yeah, we had to go there. Okay. Let me go back over to the chat room to see what you guys have to say. What else was I going to talk about? The violent crime rates in Ohio. Guess what happened there? Last June, they became the 23rd state to have permitless carry. And of course, all the gun control activists and the politicians said, "Oh, it's going to be more dangerous. It's going to be bad." One of the state representatives even claimed that Republicans have made it crystal clear that they value the approval of the gun lobby more than the lives of Ohioans and the police officers who protect our community. Well, the stats from the FBI, the Uniform Crime Report, are now publicly available. And what happened? Well, no, none of those things actually came to pass. In fact, overall violent crimes were down in Ohio and in the U.S. accordingly, both Ohio and the U.S. as a whole. But Ohio saw a staggering 7.5% decrease from the year previous, while the U.S. saw a 1.6% decrease. So almost a 5 or 6 times the decrease in Ohio as you saw across the U.S. Ohio had 6.1 homicides per year, per 100,000 per year last year, compared to 7.5 in 2021 and 7 in 2020. And so they actually dropped below the national per homicide average as well. So overall crime, homicide, violent crime, the drop is far outpacing the national average on this. And this is, but remember the same, if you are old enough to remember the debate that went on in Florida. Florida became one of the first states to institute a statewide concealed carry bill. That was a very easy to get concealed carry bill. And you had people like the Brady Bunch and Handgun Control Incorporated and a bunch of other people saying it would be blood in the streets in Florida. It would be the new opening of the OK Corral. It would be horrific and it would be bad and everything. It was, all bad all the time. And what happened? Crime plummeted in Florida. And in fact, they were having many instances of tourism crime where they would recognize a rental car and they'd carjack you. And it was horrific. But after that started, not so much. In fact, crime in Florida cratered over the next few years. So it was not the gunfight at the OK Corral scene that they were looking at. Ironically, in Ohio, the one blip on the radar in this was that in Cleveland and in Columbus, it was a different story. Murders in Cleveland have increased by almost 14%, while Columbus had seen a 9.6% jump in homicides that year. That's because the anti-gun politicians in those cities have continued to hold different laws than what the rest of the state sees, disallow a lot of these things. Oh man, it's I mean, this is like a blue, it's not a, I guess I wouldn't say blue state, but it's a blue problem. This is a blue problem. What was the other Gallup poll? There's another Gallup poll that showed that 49% of Democrats want a handgun ban. That was that is definitely not what you want to hear. 49% of Democrats say they want a handgun ban. Because again, I think it plays into the narrative. It plays into the narrative. Now, most Americans do not favor a handgun ban. Overall, only 27% of Americans believe that there should be a ban on handguns. Americans believing guns make home more safer are actually outdoing those think that it makes more dangerous. 64% think that guns make homes safer versus 32% thinking that make it more dangerous, which is a complete inverse from 2000. 2000, it was almost flipped on its head. But it's interesting to watch. You can see this new where is this thing? Rasmussen poll. Let me copy this link here and you can post it. You guys can go read the stats on this Rasmussen poll because it's interesting. Here is the latest right here. Here is the latest right here. UCRs are gold, says Jeannie. Yeah, the uniform crime reports are, I mean, they're amazingly full of facts. Which, again, going back to what Benitez says, 464 deaths with rifles, all rifles, and then pulling out the statistic of that means 0.0000186% of crimes were committed with those long guns, which meaning that 99.9999% of it's lawful. It's facts count, folks. F your feelings. Facts count. That's kind of what somebody said once. Maybe it was me. All right, here we go. I gotta change the light. We're gonna jump into it. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Let's get to it. All right. Hey, the weekend. Yes, please bring it. Bring it on with great alacrity. Schnell. Mach Schnell. I don't know. I'm ready. Willie Waffle, wafflemovies.com comes in every week to give us the full weekend movie reviews and all that kind of jazz. So we start with him right now. Hello, my friend. How are you on this beautiful
I'm feeling
Friday?
good, man. The weekend cannot come fast enough.
No, it can't. It really cannot. I am so ready for it. You have no idea. All right. So let's crack on, shall we? Let's crack on.
Yeah.
See if we can get it done. We'll start off with the court versus Robert De Niro. No, it's Robert De Niro versus his ex-assistant. This is a behind-the-scenes peek that you probably didn't necessarily want to know about.
Yeah, not of De Niro, not of anybody that you actually like on this planet. So,
right.
Yeah, this is Robert De Niro. He's had this long running feud with his ex-assistant. Now, she was fired from his company, and shortly after, she filed this court case alleging, bullying, sexual harassment, forcing her to work too much, and now all this testimony is coming out in court. So, she's testifying that, that Robert De Niro would ask her to scratch his back, and she'd offer a back scratcher, and he'd say, "No, I like the way you do it." He would often call her the B word to her face on a regular basis. He would joke around about his Viagra prescription and how maybe she could get impregnated via artificial insemination by another male employee at the company. Now, on the flip side, De Niro has accused her of stealing money. There was a bunch of trips and a Louis Vuitton bag and some fancy dinners and iPhones that suddenly were rung up on company credit cards that they didn't know about. She was allegedly binge watching Friends all day on Netflix.
Oh.
She was stealing his frequent flyer miles, according to De Niro, so she could take fancy trips, and did not get along with his girlfriend. And so they've been going back and forth, and members of De Niro's entourage have been testifying this week after De Niro testified on Monday and Tuesday, and I'm just going to say it was so entertaining because it was everything you expected. Robert De Niro is just fed up with everything. He is grumpy as grumpy can be.
Right.
He shouldn't even be in a courtroom. He's just acting like De Niro and figured he can get away with anything.
This just sounds so tawdry and petty at this point.
Oh, it
I'm
is.
just like, oh my God.
No one wins.
What's she trying? She's just trying to get something out of this. She trying to get money, or is he trying to get her arrested, or what's the deal?
Well, he was coming after her for some damages. She's coming after him for unlawfully dismissing her employment. Feels that there was supposed to be a severance, and there was some sort of argument during that time where it all fell apart, and they said, well, we're not going to pay you, and she said, yeah, you are. So yeah, it's everybody fighting over money and trying to hurt each other. And no one's gonna really win. No one's really gonna win. Yeah.
Well, it is what it is. I'm not going to lose any sleep over that one way or the other. Although I might lose sleep over this because even I, as a kid, occasionally watched Sesame Street. But now we're getting Sesame Street reimagined, which in this day and age just sends chills down my spine.
Oh yeah, this is horrible. I read this and I had to stop and just put my phone down for a minute because I'm like, I'm not ready to deal with it. And here it is. Yes, Sesame Street, starting in 2025, they're going to drop their current format. And according to what they're going to be doing, they're going to focus on, quote, longer story-driven segments and put a new animated series in the middle. So, like, they'll have two 11-minute segments that are, quote, more dynamic and sophisticated stories. And
for
then
kids, for K through 6,
for kids.
right? Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And then every episode, then they'll insert like a 5-minute animated short that they're hoping will turn into an entire half-hour show on its own, and it's going to feature the stories of what happens in 123 Sesame Street, the apartment building that's right there on the street that a lot of the folks live in, and we see the stoop all the time. But now they're going to take us inside into the wild, crazy things that happen there. And they're going to have every week a signature song that they hope will be sung by famous people. They're going to make it more interactive in the sense that characters will now break down the third wall and start talking to the audience and addressing them directly. Yeah, it's I don't know, but it's now here's the catch. Nobody owns this new season yet. Next year is going to be their final year in their deal with HBO Max, or Max as it's now called. So whoever picks this up is going to get the new season with an entirely new Sesame Street,
which is an unknown quantity, which makes you wonder whether anybody's going to want to pick it up. 55 seasons, though. 55 years. That's quite. I guess that's quite an accomplishment. But I mean, just in this day and age, Willie, I can't imagine we're going to go inside 1, 2, 3 and see what happens. And is Ernie and Bert, are they really just roommates? Are the other, all these other, I mean, just this, I could just see it. Can't you? I mean, is it me or can you just see it?
Yeah. I just, I like what they do now. I mean, does it mean now that my kid's not going to learn how to count? I mean, just things like that. Yeah. I mean, how are they going to incorporate those traditional Sesame Street elements when they're trying to make it more character driven
and make it a story? Like these kids have got an attention span enough for that. I mean, these were like these are like mostly like 4 or 5 minute segments. ABCs, 1, 2, 3s. This is how it goes. I can't imagine that this. Well, I just don't see anything good happening from this. But that's just me. Again, I'm a grumpy old man. That's probably why.
Well, and the whole idea of breaking down the wall and having the characters address the audience. I mean, like what, like Oscar the Grouch is going to turn into Jim from The Office, and he's going to make little funny
Yeah,
faces or something
exactly.
now. I mean, like
Yeah.
what's that all about?
Well, it's a sad. I mean, again, it's hard to see your heroes die or your childhood come to an end that way. But I guess that's what I felt that way after Captain Kangaroo died. You know what I mean? That was like that was
Yeah.
a big thing. All right. Well, let's move on to anything else. Was there anything else that I missed or that you missed?
There's a late breaking story that happened over the past couple of days that I find very, very interesting. HBO got caught. It turns out that HBO had a whole crew of staffers who had phony Twitter accounts, and they would have phony profiles, and they would attack critics who said bad things about their shows.
Oh,
And so, yes. So, if you were a critic and you didn't like their new show, somebody in the comment section of wherever you wrote, whatever website or whatever, would harass you and hound you. If it was Twitter, they'd respond to you on Twitter. And, and this all came out because, again, a wrongful termination suit by a former employee who brought this up. And at first, HBO was kind of like, we're really focused in on we're focused on the wrongful termination suit. That's really what counts here, not this other story.
Don't pay attention
finally,
to this.
Yeah. And finally, it got so bad on Thursday that they just had to say, yeah, we did it.
Yeah,
we did it. You caught us. We're kind of ashamed of it. Sorry.
Maybe.
But it's so funny though, because I still remember back in the day when Sony Pictures was creating fake movie critics to promote movies of theirs that stunk. And it was this big, massive outrage. This thing this week is like, yeah, I'm surprised nobody else is doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, big shocker. I mean, the internet's not real. That's shocking.
Exactly.
All right, let's get over to the streams. We got 4. I'll let you take them in whatever order you want to take them. I mean, bad to worse, worse to good. I mean, good, whatever you think.
All right, I'll go bad to good. And bad, I really wanted this to be one of the good ones, but All the Light We Cannot See, a new Netflix series, a story about how during World War II, the World War II is kind of coming towards an end, and we find this small little town in Nazi-occupied France. There's this blind French girl who is broadcasting radio programs to try to keep up the spirits and keep fighting against the Nazis, and the Nazi soldier who's tasked with finding her and ending these, and of course meeting her and finding out who she is, and then he realizes we're all people too, and we're all supposed to learn something about each other. We're supposed to care. There's all sorts of stories about what her family has gone through. I mean, I don't want to minimize the stories and minimize the plight, but it really just kind of feels like there's not enough real complexity or storytelling to draw me in and make me care about anybody here. So I'm going to be like 1.5 waffles.
Oh man, that's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, because I could see some opportunity here. I mean, I could see some backstory, especially if they're going to become love interests where, now she's Vichy French, now she's a collaborator. I could see all these different kinds of things that could happen there. But it's sad when you've got a great story idea or something like that in a backdrop and it's not quite executed the way you think it should be.
Yeah, and I think it's based on a very well-known book, and I have a feeling the people who love the book are going to be very unhappy with these 4 episodes.
Oh man! All right, so that's All the Light We Cannot See on Netflix. 1.5 waffles. What's next?
Now we're moving forward to What Happens Later. It's a new rom-com from Meg Ryan.
Okay.
Yeah, she also she helped write it and direct it. Stars her and David Duchovny. They're 2 former boyfriend and girlfriend, 2 former lovers who find themselves 25 years later stranded by a snowstorm in the same small airport. And of course, they're going to talk about what happened back then. They're going to talk about what they've been doing since then. And talk. And if it was better dialogue, I'd be very, very excited. But it's very pithy. It's very phony. It's very stiff. they're trying to get kind of cute with how maybe mystically the airport's trying to get them together, and fate is trying to bring them back together, and it just doesn't fly, and it's not exciting, and it doesn't warm my heart. I'm going 2 waffles.
Well, that's higher than I expected based on what you just said.
Well, you can't deny that David Duchovny and Meg Ryan know what they're doing,
right?
And and they've got some nice chemistry, and they keep this thing afloat the best they can.
What do you mean they keep this thing afloat? She wrote it the best they can. She wrote it and directed it. I mean,
Yeah, well, and it's also kind of like, if I remember correctly, it's also partially based on a play. So, like she wrote it in the sense that there was her and the playwright kind of combining forces to turn it into a movie.
She wrote the screenplay, the movie screenplay, right? Of the same thing, yeah.
Well, and she helped direct it. And I think that I wanted more flair from her as a director, something more interesting. I mean, if there's somebody who knows romantic comedies inside and out, you think she would see some new angle or something special that we haven't seen before.
I haven't seen Meg Ryan in forever, so that would be interesting to watch. All right.
She hasn't been. I think it's been like 6 or 7 years since she's even done anything.
Yeah.
Maybe 8 years.
All right, what's next?
Yeah. Well, then we have Till Murder Do Us Part, the new Netflix docuseries about one of the, and this is a very, very tawdry tale. I remember this. So it's a true story. Back in 1985, these 2 students from the University of Virginia. One, the boy, he's kind of a little bit younger. He is a German. Well, his family was like German diplomats, and he's in the States and going to school. And she is from a fairly well-off family,
right?
And she hates her parents with a passion. And her and the boyfriend are accused of setting up and murdering them. More to the point, she is accused of convincing him and cajoling him and manipulating him into murdering the parents.
Right.
And the whole court case plays out, and why this is kind of becoming another story now is that during the trial, her own stepbrothers, the sons of the stepmother that was murdered, felt that she was there. That it wasn't that the story that she's telling, that she kind of got the kid revved up and he went down and did it himself and she just covered for him. They seem to think that's baloney. And now here we are years later, and the accused, this Jan Soring, if I remember correctly, Jan Soring, he is trying to say that she the story I told is totally true.
I just took the fall for her. Is it?
All right. I took the fall for her, basically.
Negative 1 to 4 waffles on that one. We're running out of time here.
I'm at 2.5 waffles. I think it's pretty interesting.
All right. So a minute. What happens later? I'm sorry, Priscilla Presley story, written, directed by Sofia Coppola. Give it to me.
And that's what makes it so awesome, and this young gal, this Kaylee Spaney, who plays Priscilla Presley, the story of being, a 14-year-old girl who meets Elvis Presley while he's serving in the army in Germany. And of course, that we know that they fall in love, that he marries her, brings her back to the United States, and she is there as his life falls apart and has to deal with all of that in front of her. Great performances from her, from Jacob Elordi, who plays Elvis. And I think Spaney just really grabs you with all the growth that this young woman goes through in a very, very short time. 3 waffles for Priscilla.
Okay, sounds good. Folks, that means we're out of time. We will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Sorry, I didn't mean to rush you on that, but we were.
Totally cool. I went too long. I went too long.
I'm sure my wife will love this. I'm just, I'm kind of blah on, I like Elvis songs and stuff like that, but I just, the whole royalty, rock and roll royalty thing, Priscilla and the story. I'm sure it's a lovely story. I just, for some reason, but Sofia Coppola. I mean, again, talking about royalty, that's movie making royalty there, right?
Oh, and she's just, I think she's fabulous. I mean, she has grown into a wonderful filmmaker, equal to her father, frankly. And she just really understands how to frame characters and the stories that they're going through, and capturing the emotions and capturing the changes And I think that's what this movie really is all about. Is that idea that here's this young kid, she thinks everything is awesome, everything's perfect and working out. Prince Charming has shown up. He's Elvis Presley. And then, the reality that she faces, the darkness of his life, the drug use, and how she's trying to protect her kid from it, how she realizes they got to get away from it. She's got to get divorced and facing that challenge. And I think, it's really amazing to see her, growing again from basically a starstruck kid to, a woman who becomes much more adult than Elvis, even though they're much different in age.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's kind of a tragic story in many ways. I'm familiar with it, but
tragic.
But interesting to see. Okay, next week, what are we going to watch?
That would be The Marvels.
The Marvels. All right. We'll see. That's the triple,
it's
right?
Time
That's
for Captain Marvel. Yep.
That's the three Marvel ladies that are going to be. That'll be interesting. Have you watched the new season of Bosch yet?
I have
Bosch
not.
Legacy.
I
Bosch
need to
Legacy.
catch up.
I know. I
got to get caught up.
I will say I've been watching a series called The Irrational on Peacock, which has got the guy from Law and Order.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So good. I'm so pissed that they're only dropping an episode at a time because I could watch them all. They're that good. They're very enjoyable.
Well, it's also airing on NBC every week.
Yeah.
Because that was one of their series that they kind of put into place because of the strike.
Yeah.
So you're held to the fact that they're only doing one a week on NBC. Yeah.
All right, Willie. Well, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it, folks. I got to go. We'll see you on Monday. I hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy yourself. Be careful out there with all that water and ice and snow.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.
because we are took us all of